One important scripture I want to quote for you, which I think relates to us the importance of key teachings in the scripture, and that is this one verse. If I gain the whole world and lose my soul, then what has it profited me? Sometimes we spend a lot of time doing things that are really, in the long run, insignificant. What I would like to convey by way of my website and on the videos is the fact that J Frank Norris was the greatest soul winner that I believe of his generation. Much could be gleaned from his methods and his way in which he could lead men unto salvation. Schools and seminaries would do themselves well if they would learn from this man. But sadly, it becomes necessary to try to correct much of the rhetoric that has been a part of the history of church leaders. And in this case, J Frank Norris has been unfairly maligned, tarred and feathered, so to speak, unfairly. And it becomes expedient, or at least I feel so, on my part, to try and set the record straight. And so having to defend a noble man from half-truth allegations detracts from focusing upon the real message, which is how to be a successful soul winner. I've entitled this video, Muckraking at its Best. And the subtitle is simply this: all of this cozy KKK talk is nothing more than fuzzy muckraking. That's what's been going on and attempted by people who want to malign and mislead the history of J Frank Norris. In the early 1920s, Texas was a hotbed of KKK activity. The 5 areas of Klan agenda included anti-Catholic rhetoric, the anti-black sentiments, the influx of the Jewish immigrants, and the sleazy bootleggers of the Prohibition era, as well as wife beaters, which included wayward husbands. These 5 elements of Klan concern played a great part in the mushrooming influence of the KKK. Such a huge amount of the population of the state of Texas was caught up in the atmospheric frenzy that roughly 1/2 of all the population were either members of the Klan or overtly in sympathy with one or more of these 5 areas of concern. To have lived through this period of between 1920 through 1927 would have made an inevitable impact upon almost all of the population in Texas. And I don't mention other parts of the country. That's another story. To make a fair and adequate judgment on any one of several persons who might have been on the peripheral fringes of Klan alleged connections would take a massive amount of research, which at this time does not exist, as far as I am aware of. One of the early Texas governors, Pat Knapp, was a revered Baptist leader and was, by all accounts, swept into office in 1922, partially by virtue of solid Klan support. His opponents had accused him of taking a weak stance concerning this support from the Klan. Later, in office, Klansmen were allowed to post their flags on the Capitol grounds of Austin, Texas. Considering the context of the time, posterity does not equate Pat Neff with being cozy with the Klan. He is revered in the annals of Texas Baptist history, and rightfully so. The Women's Christian Temperance Union, WCTU, has been a long-time associate against the abuse of alcohol. In the 1920s, the WCTU shared a common interest with the KKK in promoting the enforcement of prohibition laws. Does anyone doubt the credibility of the WCTU? I ask that question, in which you might do some research on your own. Are they considered common cohorts in concert with the KKK? My answer is an emphatic no, and history does not support such a supposition. In the case of another respected governor of Texas, Dan Moody, was accused by former Governor Jim Ferguson as having the support of the KKK. Ferguson, campaigning for his wife, affectionately known as Ma Ferguson, in 1926 said that Moody's campaign was daddied in the evoluted monkey inn of the Baptist Church and boosted by the KKK. I'm simply quoting what Governor or former Governor Jim Ferguson said in his campaign against Dan Moody. All of Ferguson's rhetoric flies in the face that Moody, as Attorney General of Texas, had successfully fought the Klan. History, therefore, is a certain vindicator of the facts, and Moody, to this day, remains a hero. From the pen of Michael Phillips, writing for the Fort Worth Weekly on July the 2nd, 2006, quotes a high-ranking Klansman in 1922 congratulating the local Klan leaders, stating that 90% of your preachers, your leading lawyers, and your social leaders are loyal Klansmen. With so much apparent evidence of Klan presence and predominant influence, it would seem that some degree of Klan connection would be almost unavoidable. Would the First Baptist Church, then, of Fort Worth be immune? My answer is no. They were in the midst of this time period. But citing isolated incidences is not credible evidence in trying to make a case. The ministry of the First Baptist Church of Fort Worth deserves no more or less treatment than that which is afforded others in this time period. I quote from Barry Hankins in his book, claims that J Frank Norris was no more racist than others of his time. If Dan Moody and Pat Neff were not racist, neither was J Frank Norris. On March the 13th, listen to this, 1924, the Fort Worth Fat Stock Show designated that day as Klan Day. Were the city fathers who were promoters of the stock show Klan sympathizers? One isolated incident does not prove a case in view of the times in which it occurred. In view of the 5 elements of Klan element, who can say which of the 5 elements were predominantly represented? By way of analogy, I use the example of World War II, in which I was actively engaged in processing thousands of German war prisoners. I did not get the feeling that all of these prisoners were hardened Nazi criminals, even though they fought in Hitler's war against the United States. Surprisingly, a month after V-Day, we, American soldiers, mixed and mingled with these prisoners, who a month before had been our bitter enemies. Our feelings of bitterness began to vanish, and we saw these ragged prisoners as victims in a light which had been impossible just 2 months earlier. The purpose of my website is to factually present the ministry of J Frank Norris in an honest way. Indeed, he was a man of strong convictions, in which oftentimes ran counter to a more moderate way of approach. But I emphasize, he did not need to hide behind a bed sheet in the secrecy of the night to express his opinions. And in closing, I offer this in evidence. His friendship with Rabbi George Fox was not accidental. And by the way, his friendship with Rabbi George Fox is icing on the cake. Thank you for listening to my video. God bless each one, and God bless America. Thank you.